The protagonist of this story, Araji Kai, seemed to everyone around him to be an ordinary gloomy teenager from high school, but in reality, he wasn't that simple at all. He was a professional assassin who terrified his victims, none of whom had ever escaped. Araji Kai's classmates hated him and bullied him because of his antisocial character and weird aura. But everything changed one day when Araji and his classmates were suddenly transferred to another world, a world of swords and magic. A mysterious messenger announced to them that they were all heroes, called to this world to defeat the Demon King, and to help them with such a daunting task, she bestowed them with superpowers. And, of course, Araji Kai got the most powerful one of all. Well, if you want to know which one, let's start this story from the beginning and get to the bottom of it. The scene starts with a man running through a dark alley. He looked anxious and afraid. As he came to a stop, he looked back and thought that maybe he got away somehow, but then, suddenly, someone put a knife against his throat. The man told the assassin that he would give him money if he wanted it in return for his life. But the very next second, the assassin slit his throat. The next morning, a young schoolboy was on his way to school, and he looked tired. His name was Araji Kai. He yawned and thought that after working all night long, it really sucked to go to school. He worked as an assassin. When he entered his classroom, other students began whispering among themselves. A boy named Midu Shuji greeted him with a wide smile. He was the soccer club's ace and the class president. Kai returned his greeting coldly and sat down at his desk. Meanwhile, a girl named Nagase Rei saw it all and commented that Kai was rude as always. She was a fashionable girl who stood out from the rest of the girls in the class. She went to Shuji and told him sternly that he need not greet people like Kai. Shuji defended him by saying that he might be tired, and that's why he was so cold. Suddenly, another student entered the classroom, and upon seeing him, Rei remarked how an even ruder person had just entered. The rude student's name was Erasure Shunsuke, the leader of a notorious local gang. A few students greeted Erasure, but when he saw that Kai was sleeping instead of greeting him, he went to his bench and yelled at him to get up. He drew his hand to grab him, but Kai grabbed his hand before he could react and said that he was sleepy and asked what he wanted from him. He let go of his hand, and Erasure called him a weirdo. Suddenly, another student named Kenzaki Rin asked them to be quiet. She was beautiful and talented, both in martial arts and literature. She was the cool and aloof top beauty of the school. Erasure confronted her but was cut short by another girl named Hashimoto Emu, who was a serious disciplined committee girl who really cared about order. Watching her ready to fight Erasure, a boy named Narumi Yoshia told her that Erasure would just blow her away. Yoshia was a shallow and frivolous guy. Everyone soon got back to their seats. This was Shinzo High School, first-year class, and it was just another regular day in a class with a lot of problems. Kai was still keeping his head down when he suddenly sensed something, a weird sensation coming from under Shuji's feet. A bright blue light began emitting from the floor, and a magic spell circle appeared. Soon, everyone in the class noticed it and were confused and shocked. The magic circle grew in size and covered the entire classroom. The floor under Shuji began to glow, and he instructed everyone to leave the classroom, but Kai knew they wouldn't make it in time. Soon, the bright light blinded everyone, and they were all teleported inside what looked like an old castle. Everyone was lying unconscious on the ground, and Kai was the first to come back to his senses. He noticed that the building was made of stone, with several large pillars to take cover, and there was only one exit. Soon, the other students also began coming back to their senses. Everyone was panicking, but Shuji calmed them down, and Kai was relieved that Shuji was someone who could keep the whole class from losing their composure. Erasure got up and said that they could not waste any time, and he asked his two minions to follow him. Kai stopped him and said that he could hear footsteps coming towards them from the other side of the door. Kai sensed that there was a man and a woman coming through. Soon, the door opened, and a girl and an old man entered the room. They both looked like a medieval knight and princess and were wearing unusual and old-fashioned flowy clothes with capes. The girl greeted the students, saying that they were impressive and called them hero candidates. The students were surprised to see them. Kai analyzed both of them and concluded that the man had the physique of a sword user and had his guard up too, and as for the girl, he sensed slight muscles, but she seemed pretty normal to him. The girl introduced herself as Leonora, the Archbishop of the Holy Country of Digest, and the man with her was Guaz, who was a knight and her protector. Erishur told her that he had never heard of the country before and asked her if she was messing with them. The girl replied that she certainly was not messing with them. Shuji came forward and explained to her that they suddenly found themselves there and were thus a little bit on edge. The girl began explaining the entire thing to them. She began by saying that they were summoned to a parallel world as a hope for humanity to defeat the evil demon king. They were the parallel world's hero candidates. It was hard for the students to believe something like that. Guaz told Erishur to watch his mouth while talking to the saint of the country. Erishur was unfazed by this, and this made Guaz draw his sword, but Leonora pacified him. Erishur jumped at Guaz, and Kai was amazed by his bravery. Before Erishur could land an attack, Guaz flung his sword and made a little cut on his head. His attack was so fast that no one saw it. Leonora apologized for his aggression and said that she would explain everything to them in detail, but for that, they all had to be quiet and listen to her. Her demeanor suddenly changed from being calm to being scary. She explained that because of the Demon King's invasion, humanity of that world was facing extinction. The country of Digest continued resisting, but they did not have the power to completely stop the invasion anymore. Kai thought that the story was a pretty common one. She continued, saying that they were the last hope of humanity. Upon hearing this, the students replied that they could not do this, as they had never fought before. Some of the girls were already crying. Guaz said that it might sound impossible, but they would have to try, as there was no way for them to return to their own world unless they defeated the Demon King. The students were even more shocked upon hearing this. Kai knew that he only said that to motivate them. He thought that the people who had always lived peacefully could not just suddenly start killing, as for that, they needed experience and talent. Erishur got up with blood on his head and cursed them for dictating to them. He added that he hated people like them. Guaz noticed that Arashi's spirit was still unbroken and wondered if he could be a useful warrior. Guaz held his sword and decided to kill Erishur, as he could be trouble for them. But before he could do anything, he saw that Leonora was healing Arashi's wound. She explained that the power she was using was called the system and was granted to them by their gods. She simplified it for them and said that it was just like magic from their world. Kai noticed that she knew about their culture and wondered if she had previously summoned people from their world. She walked toward Shuji while saying that the power was the reason why she summoned them all there. She raised her hands, and Shuji's wrist began glowing, and soon he had a sword made of light in his hand. She further explained that they could wield the power of the system and awaken their innate abilities of divine protection. She said that she knew she had a selfish request, as she called them all there, and now they could not leave, and asked them to lend her their powers. Shuji said that no matter how much power they gave them, they still could not fight right away. She replied that they would indeed be trained, and during their training, they would be taken care of. Shuji took control of the situation and told his classmates that he knew they were scared, but the first thing they needed was information and protection. He told them that they should hear them out for now, and the classmates agreed with him. When Leonora saw that they were all ready to lend their hands, she began giving them their divine powers. Muri was given telekinesis, Erishur got explosion powers, Rina received fire powers, Yoshia received wind powers, and others also received different and amazing powers. Leonora asked if anyone was left, and Kai raised his hand. She gave him his powers too, and he noticed that his field of vision was changing, and as soon as he finished getting his powers, he could read Leonora's stats. His eye color changed to red, and Leonora told him that he had received the power of judgment, which was rather rare. The power would let him see his target stats and details. He tried his powers on himself and was able to see his own stats. Erasure also tried his powers and made fun of Kai, saying that he only got a new eye color. Kai noticed that the students were acting high and mighty. They didn't even have much information about the world yet, and their powers were also borrowed and could be taken away at any time. But he was chill because he had plenty of other ways to kill people. After everyone received their powers, Leonora told them to take some rest. In the evening, the hero candidates were taken to their personal rooms. Kai sneaked out of his window in search of more information. Outside, guards were patrolling and talking about how the hero candidates looked weak. They made fun of how those kids were chosen to defeat the Demon King. One of them said that the saints surely know something they didn't. Kai listened to their conversation entirely. He used his judgment power to check the stats of one of the guards and noticed that he only knew swordsmanship. He soon left in search of more information. He had also learned about the structure of the city, which was a fortified city. He wanted to get inside the inner castle, but the gates were heavily guarded, so it was hard to sneak in. He decided not to rush things and come back another time. Meanwhile, in an open field, Rina was looking for a good spot with her two minions. They were there to practice their new powers. They began conjuring their respective elements and observing them, as Rina was curious to know more about the whole divine protection stuff. Kai was hiding in a bush, spying on them when he suddenly felt a strange sensation. The girls also heard a weird noise coming from the bushes. It was a giant lizard-looking creature, attracted by the girls' magic. Kai quickly used his magic to view the monster's stats, and he was shocked by how overwhelmingly high they were. The monster roared and charged at the girls, prompting Kai to conclude that it was indeed strong and aggressive. However, he observed that it ran only in a straight line and lacked intelligence. He threw a knife at it, and it pierced the creature's thick skin. At that moment, Rina stumbled and fell. The monster caught up to her and was just about to crush her when it suddenly stopped. Looking around, the girls noticed a knife embedded in its head, with blood oozing out. They wondered if someone had saved her, but they didn't stay to find out and hurriedly left. Kai knew he had no obligation to rescue them, yet his conscience wouldn't let him ignore their situation. Kai reflected on how difficult things were bound to become if monsters like this one roamed freely. Approaching the monster's body, he bent down to retrieve his knife when he suddenly sensed someone nearby. He quickly hid behind the body and scanned the area but saw no one. Deciding to avoid any trouble, he returned to his room. Not long after, a figure emerged from behind a wall. Cloaked in a robe that concealed their face, the figure smashed the monster's head, forcing its eyes to pop out. They muttered, disappointed by the weakness of the hero candidates. However, they noted that Kai smelled like him. The following morning, Guaz presented the slain monster's body to the hero candidates, who were stunned at the sight. He explained that the creature had been found dead near the royal capital the previous night. According to Guaz, the Demon King had driven the monsters into a frenzy, making them crave human flesh, and warned the candidates that they'd be facing similar threats. Guaz then turned to Stady, a researcher, and asked if he'd noticed anything unusual about the monster. Stady replied that traces of sorcery had likely been used by a mid-level demon or higher, possibly as part of reconnaissance on the new hero candidates. Curious, Kai wondered if sorcery was distinct from magic, as it was a new term. Shuji then asked if this meant the monster was under a demon's control. Stady explained that powerful demons could use servitude spells to control weaker creatures. Before he could explain further, Guaz dragged him away, though Kai saw him as a valuable source of information. Kai then realized the intense gaze he'd felt last night belonged to a demon who was skilled enough to barely be detected. He sensed someone watching him and wondered if the demon was present even now. Erasure voiced his intention to kill the demon so they could return home, and others echoed his sentiment. Kai thought it was time they all grasped the harsh truth of their situation. Just then, Leonora entered and encouraged them, explaining that they were unfamiliar with their powers but would improve with training. Because they were from another world, she explained, their growth rate would differ from locals. A week passed as the students trained. Kai, who spent his time in the library, had learned to read their new language, though he found it strange they could all communicate so easily in the first place. His judgment power was unsuited to combat, so he was excluded from training and permitted to access the library, where he discovered little about their history, culture, or demons. Among the candidates, the strongest were Narumi, a wind user, Arisher, who wielded explosions, Kanzaki, who had telekinesis, Hashimoto, with power over land, and Rina, who used fire. However, Shuji, whose growth rate was especially remarkable, stood out. Shuji had surpassed the swordsman who trained him, and Kai observed through his judgment power that Shuji's stats had risen from below D grade to above B grade in just a week. One day, two boys mocked Kai, and he noticed others looking down on him, emboldened by their newfound powers. When one tried to intimidate him, Kai stealthily threw him to the ground. Meanwhile, Leonora and Guaz arrived at the training ground, announcing that the students' rapid growth had led to an acceleration of their plans. Narumi asked if they'd be facing the Demon King, but Leonora clarified that they'd first need to practice against monsters. Anxiety spread among them as they took this in. The following day, Guaz and Leonora brought the candidates to a forest for combat drills, where obstacles would hinder large groups' movements. Thus, they'd work in teams of 2 to 3. Quickly, the candidates chose groups, leaving Kai and Kanzaki to team up alone. Kai noted Kanzaki's confident yet aloof nature and her evident pride. She caught him staring, while Leonora announced that the team defeating the most monsters would earn a special reward. As the drills began, Kanzaki declared that her abilities surpassed the others, so she didn't need his help, insisting he stay out of her way. Agreeing, Kai said he'd leave everything to her. This prompted her to question if he had any pride. Kai sensed 4 entities hiding nearby, and as one monster charged, Kanzaki used her domination power, an ability that compelled obedience. She commanded the goblin to bow, and it obeyed, though visibly exhausted her. She explained to Kai that prolonged use of her power drained her mana. Noticing another monster approaching, Kai suggested she kill the goblin, but she hesitated, seeing it as almost human. Kai reminded her it had attacked them, and, realizing she was an ordinary Japanese student unaccustomed to violence, he picked up a stone to demonstrate. 3 more goblins appeared, and Kanzaki commanded them to bow, asking Kai to assist. Kai reminded her she told him not to interfere, so she sighed and ordered the goblins to twist their own necks, killing them. Impressed by the strength of her commands, Kai learned that the more challenging the order, the lower its success rate. Kanzaki felt disgusted by the sight of the goblins' bodies, but Kai offered some comforting words. She asked how he could remain so calm without powers, and he reassured her it was his strength. He also noted her bravery, despite her earlier hesitance, which earned a look of pride. Meanwhile, Narumi and Hashimoto faced a monster too strong for them to escape, so they launched an attack using wind and rock powers, hitting it with a massive boulder, which barely injured it. Helpless, they feared the worst, but Kanzaki, lost in thought about her grandfather and her desire to prove herself, was snapped back when Kai asked if they should continue. They engaged in light-hearted banter as they walked, though Kanzaki couldn't shake her curiosity about Kai's strange composure. Suddenly, they heard Hashimoto's screams, and Kanzaki recognized her voice. She and Kai arrived to find Hashimoto injured, bleeding, and unable to defend herself. Though she urged Narumi to flee, it was too late, the monster was upon them. Kanzaki ordered the monster to halt, and though Narumi thanked her, she admitted it was only temporarily restrained. Kai checked on Hashimoto, learning she was alive but gravely wounded, and suggested Narumi carry her to safety. Despite Narumi's hesitation, he complied. Kai then assessed the monster's stats, finding them incredibly high, especially in defense. He realized that his attacks would barely affect it, and he noted that it was a mutant of some sort. As Kenzaki's energy drained, Kai advised her to retreat, knowing she had done enough. When she couldn't move, he set off a smoke grenade, allowing him time to lift her and hide away. She blushed at being carried, asking about the smoke, and he explained it was a grenade he had prepared during training. Secretly, this was part of his small stash of assassin's tools. Kenzaki apologized for needing to be rescued and thanked him, leading to playful exchanges between them. She suggested they flee, but Kai noted there was no need. They spotted Shuji and the others arriving. Without hesitating, Shuji attacked the bear monster for harming his friends. KJI starts remembering the voices of others who criticized his choices, telling him he could spend his money on something more worthwhile. They said it was being wasted and that he didn't deserve the things he had. He begins to question if they were right, staring at his phone. Torn between his desires, KJI contemplates canceling the reservation, thinking that maybe he should save the 8,000 yen for his living expenses. Suddenly, he shouts out in defiance, declaring himself an otaku. He feels a rush of emotions, struggling internally. He knows his savings aren't enough to cover his expenses, but his desire to continue his otaku lifestyle is overpowering. He can't help but wonder if Hinata is judging him, thinking that his money is being wasted and should be used for something more practical. However, Hinata shouts back, saying she doesn't think that way at all, surprising KJI. She explains that spending money on what you love is totally fine, and she does the same. She shares that she loves dyeing her hair monthly and spends on clothes, makeup, and sweets. Hinata also confesses that people online tell her the same thing, criticizing her spending as a waste just for something photogenic. KJI listens, surprised by this. Hinata holds up her phone, explaining that all of it means something to her because it's her hard-earned money. She shows him her bank statement, explaining that her income comes from her part-time job and ad revenue from blogs and videos. Most of her spending goes toward food, fashion, and other things. She insists that if KJI wants to live a simple life, he needs to be serious about managing his finances. She tells him that it's not about being an otaku or not, but about doing his best for what he loves. She warns him that if he doesn't take it seriously, his wallet will eventually suffer. KJI quietly acknowledges her point, realizing that while he used to think that opposites like yin and yang never crossed paths, they actually do have something in common. They both spend on what they like. The difference is that Hinata works hard for her money, while he has relied on his father's allowance. KJI admires her for it, thinking she's amazing. Gathering his courage, he approaches Hinata and tells her he has a request. With a serious expression, he bows deeply, his voice trembling as he pleads for her to teach him how to manage his finances. Hinata reacts with a surprised in shock. KJI admits with a pained expression that he has no idea how much his monthly expenses, like food and bills, actually cost. He explains that up until now, he hasn't managed his money at all. Hinata stares at him in disbelief before her expression turns serious. She asks if he's for real, then smiles and agrees to help. She warns him that she's strict, but if he's okay with that, she's willing to teach him. KJI is surprised by her response. Hinata then reminds him, with a smirk, that she won't be doing it for free. KJ, caught up in the moment, eagerly asks what he should do first. Suddenly, Hinata presses him down forcefully, catching him off guard. She leans in close, her eyes sparkling with excitement, and asks if he wants to do it with her. KJI is flustered and caught by surprise, but then Hinata clarifies that she meant living together. KJI is left speechless, his face flushed in shock, trying to process what she said. He mutters in disbelief, repeating her suggestion of living together. Hinata cheerfully insists, flashing a peace sign, and says she has always wanted a room to herself. She adds that if she could live alone, she would love to try it, but her parents wouldn't allow it, and rent is too expensive, making it unrealistic. Hinata then enthusiastically suggests that she could use one of KJI's rooms, offering to pay rent, and insists that it's a great idea. Overwhelmed, KJI shouts for her to hold on, saying it's obviously not okay for a man and a woman to live together under the same roof. Hinata looks shocked and questions why it's not okay. She tries to reason with him, urging him to think about it. Blushing and smiling, Hinata declares that rooming together would be the best way to save money. KJ, still in disbelief, questions if that's really her only reason. Hinata continues enthusiastically explaining that splitting expenses is the best, and she's always wanted to try living with someone. KJI hesitates, acknowledging her point, but still wonders why she's so excited about it. Hinata explains that if she pays for a room, it would mean KJI could attend the voice actress event. Overwhelmed by her proposal, KJI agrees, filled with determination, and declares that they will live together. He declares that there's no way he can refuse if it's for simping for Kanamine. Hinata, thrilled by his response, enthusiastically tells him she will bring her belongings over tomorrow. KJI, his mind spinning, agrees, overwhelmed by how fast everything is moving. The morning sun shines over the apartment building. KJI stands outside while Hinata grabs her bike, looking confident and cheerful. She points to a bike, explaining that it will take about an hour to get to school and tells KJI that he can use that bike. KJI, visibly shocked, thinks to himself how unbelievable it is that it will take an hour on a bike. He thinks back to his previous experiences with bikes, wondering if they are just for kids. He recalls how whenever he had to walk long distances, he preferred taking a taxi, remembering waving at a taxi and asking to be dropped off at Annam. He also reminisces about the times when he would take long train rides, asking the driver to pick him up afterward. Still staring at the bike, KJI wonders aloud if it wouldn't be just a few hundred yen to take the train instead, mentioning that it would only take an hour. Hinata, looking upset, accuses him of thinking she's being stingy. With determination, she denies the accusation. Hinata explains to KJI that a one-way ticket from their place to school costs 482 yen, and a round trip would be 964 yen. She breaks down the cost further. A week would be 4,820 yen, a month would be 19,280 yen, and a 6-month pass would be 43,964 yen. Thinking he could try peeking through her determination, Hinata pushes forward on her bike, moving with effort, her eyes locked ahead with musical notes floating around her, indicating her positive mood. KJI struggles to keep up, sweat on his face as he thinks about how tough this is. KJI pedals with a strained look, visibly exhausted, thinking about how as an indoor otaku, a long bike ride is far too brutal. Hinata calls out to him, riding ahead cheerfully, waving her hands energetically and shouting words of encouragement. KJI continues to ride alongside her as they head to school. As he catches up with her, she acknowledges him cheerfully. Hinata declares enthusiastically that they're nearing the last stretch of their journey, mentioning that the next part will be an uphill ride. KJI is taken aback by her boundless energy. Hinata laughs, teasing him about his hilarious facial expression while KJI continues pedaling, clearly embarrassed. KJI thinks to himself that if not for his current situation, he'd be having a lot more fun right now. Frustrated, he struggles to keep up as Hinata announces their arrival. Behind her, KJI mutters about how they've finally made it. KJI struggles to stand, his thighs wobbling uncontrollably. Hinata notices his struggle and remarks that he looks just like a newborn baby. KJI, still exhausted, thinks about how he'll have to do this every day and how saving money feels like pure hell. Hinata calls out to him enthusiastically, suggesting they head into the apartment. KJI, startled and blushing, looks at her. Hinata tells him she plans to bring in a desk and chair and asks for his help in setting it up. KJI looks at her in awe. Hinata smiles and suggests they head in to get things ready, calling their new arrangement our little space. KJI responds with a slight blush, thinking that, despite everything, it's not so bad after all.